My first topic will be Christians have as much of a right to rule as secularists. Pleasure.
There we go. All right, so Christians have as much of a right to rule as secular people.
Correct.
Yeah,
Just to kind of, let me flesh it out a little bit for you very briefly.
Yeah.
So the idea is secularists say that only they seem to be able to have the power to push political authority. I push back against that idea and say, no, Christians also should be allowed to push political authority. And just because you're a secularist, it doesn't give you any additional right to have authority than a Christian does. So this idea of separation of church and state actually doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if Christians can push political authority, as is their right, then it seems that you're going to have Christians who are in the government and they are going to be ruling from their moral stance.
Okay, yeah, and I don't actually entirely disagree with this. I would say, though, when we're talking about Christians in authority, I think that usually what they're talking about, or the criticism, is less so that they're Christian and more so that they're operating under a dogmatic ideology. And so under that concept, like, do you think it's okay for people to use dogmas in a political sense?
Like the Constitution, like that kind of dogma?
Why would the Constitution be dogmatic?
Well, what is a dogma? Let's start with that.
A dogma is an appeal to some sort of unchanging authority.
Is that what you think it is?
I believe it is.
Yeah, so let's look at this idea. We'll kind of flesh it out a little bit here. I think that it's fine. By the way, that I'm not sure that the Constitution is able to be changed in certain parts of it, right? Or it stops becoming the Constitution. But I think the idea of what we have in America is dogmatic. The idea of, well, only secularists have the ability to rule because we have to separate out religious authority, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we do need to separate out religious authority. I don't even think we can. And so if politicians are going to rule from a moral stance, what's going to inform their morals? Well, it's going to be their religion and their dogma.
Right.
So if my dogma is informing my morals, aren't I supposed to rule from my dogma?
Well, so I think this is kind of like you can be dogmatic without appealing to a dogma. Or you can be, I think a better way to put this, I think you can be secular as a Christian, right? So being secular, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty much just operating outside of religious context, right? So in government, for example, I don't think the Constitution is dogmatic because, as you mentioned, it's amendable. Something like the Bible, right? If that's your point of moral authority, I think you can operate under that. We all have some sort of moral system that we're appealing to. But I think that when push comes to shove, right, if there's an issue like evolution, for example, right, that's a lot of pushback in schools right now. I don't think that you can appeal to evolution being false purely because it contradicts the Bible. I mean, you technically can, but I don't think it's justifiable. Does that make sense? Because it's non-falsifiable. You can't, if you're just going to assume that the Bible is true as your foundation, mm-hmm. that's operating dogmatically, and I don't think we can really make progress that way.
Yeah, but that's just assertions, right? Like, let's say that Christians did. Let's say they outlawed the teaching of evolution, mm-hmm. right? So what? What would even your argument be? If the argument is we have to outlaw prayer, we have to move prayer out, we have to move God out of schools, we have to move these things out of schools, mm-hmm. then when Christians are in charge, why shouldn't you be surprised when they say, oh, well, we're gonna move your stuff out. Yeah. Now we're gonna move your nonsense out of here, right?
I agree. Like if Christians are in power, of course they have the authority to technically do whatever they want.
Yeah, but what my argument is that they have every much right. Mm-hmm. They have as much right to utilize that political power and authority as secularists do. Secularists and atheists have no leg to stand on when they say, wait a second, Christians aren't allowed to push their power. Yes, they are. If atheists are, Christians are too.
I agree. Maybe the better way to put it is they are legally allowed to. Mm-hmm. I don't know that ethically you can do whatever you want as well, right? But I don't think it's ethically permissible. I think that this is unethical behavior.
What's unethical about it?
Well, so for example, right, if we're pushing out something like evolution, mm-hmm. I think that leads to a lot of downstream effects as far as like anti-science
So does pushing out prayer.
How so?
Well, I mean, you would have to admit that when you were a kid, maybe not when you were a kid, but at least when I was a kid, we used to pledge allegiance to the flag, right? Yes. One nation under God. So it gives a reinforcement of patriotism, an idea of solidarity with your countrymen, right? And if prayer in school also creates solidarity between people. It gives them purpose, gives them faith. There's all sorts of negative ramifications of pushing it out, right? Oh,
Wow, that goes quick. All right.
yeah, that went real quick. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So your stance is Christians have the right to rule as much as secularists?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a Christian, I can't disagree with you too much on that. However, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you shouldn't be in power. But what you do with your morals and values should not be portrayed in how you rule. I'm a big believer in church and state, or separation of church and state. So, there's a place for the religious aspect of your life and your upbringing and all that, but it shouldn't be brought into more of a power stance.
You can't separate church and state. Let me explain why. Have you ever elected a politician who's a Christian?
Yes.
Did you expect that when he ruled from his moral stances, which were informed by Christianity?
I would expect that he would have ruled based off of his policies, which...
What? How's he going to figure his policies out other than what he considers moral in his brain?
So, give me a second here.
Sure. Take your time.
So I feel like the specific people that I would vote for or elect, his policies would specifically be how I would feel, would not be based off of his Christian morals. And that's how I vote.
So where do you want him to find his morals? Like in the trash can, or like if you're electing a person to be who's a Christian into office, right? Where do you want him to get his information for how he's going to rule morally? If you're a Christian and you point to some other stance and say that's more moral than my stance, then why are you a Christian?
Give me a second. So, can you say that last part?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you elect somebody to represent you and your morals in government who's a Christian, why would you want him to rule from another stance other than Christianity? You would be then saying that other stance is more moral than his. So why would you be a Christian to begin with?
I mean, being a Christian is kind of, personally, it's more of a comfort for me,
Okay.
knowing that there's a higher power, a creator.
But it doesn't inform your morals?
Where my morals come from is kind of a collective of what you were talking with FTFE yesterday, a collective of experiences and I do lean.
So Christianity is purely cosmetic for you?
I tend to hope it's not, but
I mean, it sounds like it's purely cosmetic, and you're getting your moral information from intuition. Like, this feels good, this doesn't feel good. But Christian ethics come from the teachings and dogmas of Jesus Christ, right? The laid foundations of Jesus Christ. And if you move against those, you're moving into antichrist territory, right? You're being antichrist. So, you can't like pick and choose Christian ethics, right?
That's a fair assessment. Man, all right, I got to concede.
Okay.
This isn't really a topic that I discussed too
It's okay.
much, but it was a. Awesome.
No problem.
Nice to meet you.
You too, man.
So what was the claim again?
You don't remember the claim? It's that Christians have as much of a right to rule as secularists or atheists.
Okay, I'm a little confused as to why that. I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. What part do you
You
think
don't
that?
think that a lot of people would disagree with it?
I think
Then why do they get upset when Christians are in office and they make policy based on Christianity?
because they make policy based on Christianity, not
Yeah.
the fact that they are Christian.
Well, okay, how do you want a Christian to morally inform their view for policy making if it's not through Christianity?
I'm not saying that it can't be through Christianity. It can't be because of Christianity.
Why?
Because it's not a Christian nation.
Yeah, what does that have to do with anything? If a politician, right, you vote him in office, he's a Christian, he's going to be making moral decisions on behalf of the electorate, right?
Right.
Where do you want him
Are
to?
all those
Where do you want him
everyone in
to
the
draw
electorate
his information
Christian?
from?
From the electorate. So if
What?
the electorate's not all religious,
What if the electorate asks him to do something immoral?
well, then that's a completely different
All
thing.
right, then he should be informing his viewpoint from his ethics, which is going to be Christianity,
I mean,
right?
it's not a dichotomy. You don't either have Christian ethics or completely non-Christian. You can take your Christian ethics and apply them to a secular situation. No.
Sure, you can apply your Christian ethics
Yeah. So
to
that,
secularists,
so
but
that-
that would be ruling
so we
secularists
agree.
with Christian ethics.
right, but then we agree
Mm-hmm.
that there's no issue with Christians or seculars having power.
No, I don't think we do agree. So your idea here is you take issue if Christians make policy based on Christianity.
No, because of Christianity. This is the law because Christianity says. Not, I am a Christian, I think this is bad. And also, other people who are not Christians also think it is bad.
Let's say that other people who aren't Christians do think it's
So then we
bad.
go back to the electorate. What does the
Yeah,
electorate say?
we're gonna, but the
So if
politicians
the
are.
electorate happens to be Christian,
Yeah.
then we're
Why
gonna
is
have
there a
more
problem
Christian
with
ethics in politics?
Why is there a problem with the creation of an imposition of your ethical view if you're in a position of power on people who don't want it?
For the same reason you wouldn't want Sharia law.
But right now we have secularists who tear down 10 Commandments. They tear down prayer in school. They tear down all sorts of symbols that Christians care about. They tear down, in fact,
Okay, based on
they
the
push
electorate.
they push
right?
through. No, not just based on the electorate, based on their agenda. There's a lot of things that people will get put in. Politicians get put in office, right, by an electorate. Sometimes maybe they're only going to go for one term, or maybe it's their last term. They don't do anything based on what the electorate's saying, but based on their own ideology, based on their own worldview.
So
Atheists
they're
rule
just doing
from
things randomly that nobody.
sometimes,
I
but
mean,
atheists.
I don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter, the point is that is irrelevant to whether it is done because of Christianity. If they're doing things on their own because because they think it's a good idea, and then secularly from a Christian perspective, people can say, yes, I like that. That's a good idea. But people from a secular non-religious people can also say, I think that's a good idea. And as an electorate, as a non-Christian nation, or not officially a Christian nation, obviously most people are Christian in this nation, but not everybody. And so that's the point of having the republic, that everybody.
When
gets
somebody
represented.
says something's right and wrong, where are they getting that information?
I think I agree with you. Even as an atheist, I think we all, at least in America, are pulling from Christian, I'll say values.
Christian
more than
ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So if Christians,
but that's the dichotomy that I was bringing up before. You're saying as if you have to ignore Christianity
yeah.
in order to be a politician. I don't think anybody's making that claim.
No, I'm saying that politicians rule from atheism or rule from Christian ethics. They either rule from a lack of religion or through religious informed
So,
ethics.
I mean, and then still, I don't have an issue with your Christian ethics informing your secular decision, that this is the law.
No, how about your Christian ethics informing your Christian decision
But that's
in
not,
the rule
I
of
mean,
policy?
if you want to change the government to be a Christian nationalist government,
How would that be changing the government?
Because that's not the way it is.
Yes, it is. The way of the government right now is that you can indeed craft policy based around Christian ethics. When you say because of Christianity, it doesn't mean anything. Like, oh, my morals come from Christianity because of the Bible. It's like, yeah. So what though? I don't understand what the distinction here is.
The distinction is the reason. The reason that this is a law. I think this is
What's a law?
Whatever the law is. You might think X is a good law because it aligns with your Christian ethics. I might think X is a good law because of whatever other reason. The fact that your Christian ethics also informed us to the same conclusion. The point is that we come to the conclusion, we vote on that conclusion. Not you have your ideology and therefore you win.
Nobody's disputing that atheists can sometimes agree with Christians, or that Christians can sometimes agree with atheists when it comes to prescriptive claims and policy.
Okay.
That's not my claim.
Nice person putting
All right,
this.
thank you.